The Old Testament never mentions Jesus by name. A lot of apocryphal texts, including things like the Dead Sea Scrolls, you're going to see much stronger prophecies of the Messiah and uses of variations of his name more frequently. In Roman law, only the nearest of kin, only immediate family are allowed to request the body of the deceased. If they don't get their act together and set aside their pride, the Saxons are just going to wipe them out. And it turns out that that's exactly what happens. Jesus went to Britain and built himself a booth of Succoth and dedicated it to his mom at her birthplace. 7 years he's gone, and he comes back to the British Isles and says, I found the land of promise.
Welcome in here on Zion Media, and I got to tell you, I am pumped for this one. I'm joined by Drea, the Bomb, and we've got Bron Kimball. Now, we're going to be talking about a subject that I'm super pumped about. I've read a lot of books, and we know Jesus had other sheep that were not of the fold of Jerusalem or the fold of the Book of Mormon. We know there were people all over the world. So today, we're going to be talking about how maybe Jesus went to Britain. That's right, Britain. And I'm joined by Bron Kimball, whom I met at the Firm Foundation. He presented there, and he's going to present his presentation to us. But before we jump into the presentation, Bron, introduce yourself. I know you work for Angel Studios. You're sitting in their cool studio location right now at work. But tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us kind of how you got into studying Jesus in Britain.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the intro, Shane. Glad to be here. So my start on all this was actually my uncle, Glenn Kimball, my dad's older brother. You can Google search Glenn Kimball. He was really popular in the 90s and in the early 2000s for being an expert on religious ancient texts. He was doing university tours. He was doing late night talk shows, radio shows back then. And he ended up starting his own company. He called it Kimball University. And we're all Kimball through Heber C. Kimball's son, David Patton Kimball. But yeah, he started this university to try to show people how the ancient texts support religion more than anything else, and to not lose your faith. That was like his whole mission. And through this company, he started with his son. They were selling CDs, so they would record themselves talking about these ancient texts and record themselves on these CDs, and they'd sell them. They made about 141 or 142 of these audio lecture CDs that they were selling.
Wow, podcasts before there were podcasts.
Podcasts before there were podcasts. He was just getting into on his website the ability to download the audio file, like straight to your computer. Like that was state of the art, back then.
Wow.
Unfortunately, my uncle passed away in 2010 due to liver failure. And when he passed away, everything he was doing just kind of disappeared. In fact, it was so sudden. His own family wasn't even sure like where all of his sources were and his texts and his materials. His son Chase tried to gather as much of it as he could. But the largest collection of their work was actually given to my dad. My dad got a free copy of every CD and some of his published works and things. Anyways, he died in 2010 when I was on my mission. So I barely knew that my uncle did cool ancient text type stuff. Right. So, fast forward 8 more years. I'm a mechanical engineer here in Utah, and I start, getting interested in some of this stuff and being fascinated by like megalithic stuff. There's some wild things in our history, in Earth's history. But anyways, just decided to start looking into what my uncle Glenn was doing, and my dad had all these texts, and I started diving in, and I was fascinated. Things about Jesus's life, things about his family, context behind, where some of them came from, some of the politics going around at the time of his teaching and his crucifixion. Anyways, he had this treasure trove of ancient texts and insight from an LDS perspective. And so my brother and I just talking about it often, like, man, did you know Uncle Glenn this? You know Uncle Glenn that? And we just decided someone's got to do something about this, and we're the only ones who have a lot of his work, and so we decided.
So you're continuing it on.
That's right.
That's awesome.
So this is our book. My brother and I, we decided we're gonna get together. We're gonna write this book. We even actually got our mother involved. So Ben is my older brother, myself and Pam Kimball. That's our mom. She helped give us like a single voice between the two of us. But this is our book, Hidden Stories of Jesus in Britain. It's going to be the basis of what I'm going to talk about today. We won't talk about everything that's in the book, but I do want to talk specifically about, and if you go to the next slide.
And if somebody wants to buy the book, where do they go? Just Hidden Stories of Jesus.square.site?
Yep.
Okay, so what I'm seeing down there in the bottom right-hand corner, go get the book. Can they get it on Amazon, or is this the only place to get it?
Yeah, you can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can get it on iTunes, Audible. We got audio book ready, so you can listen to it on your car rides, all that stuff.
Awesome.
So what I want to specifically talk about is Britain and its connection to the Book of Mormon today. And what you see there on the left is a Phoenician trade ship. It's a very popular, ancient carving and Phoenician trade ship. But these guys were connecting the ancient world across open ocean. They had state-of-the-art travel. It's important to keep in mind the ancient world was more connected than the average history book talks about. They were trading from the British Isles to the Malabar coast in India.
I'm glad you bring that up. We have another guest on our podcast named Lance Weaver, and he's a geologist. He says that same thing. He said, if you think that Nephi was the first guy to build a ship and land over there, there was trade back in the time of King David. And so there was shipping and there was trading going on. Okay.
Yeah, Solomon was importing minerals from the British Isles, from Ireland specifically. Yeah, they find British tin in places like Pompeii and stuff. It's wild.
Okay.
Anyway, specifically, we want to talk about the Celtic people. The Celts are a very large ethnic group, but we want to focus today more on Britain, the Britons in the top left there, and the Gauls, northern France. Just paint a picture. A few of the Celts were there prior to the Roman Empire. In fact, they were one of the largest groups to be constantly fighting the Roman Empire. They're very diverse, but everywhere the Roman Empire expanded north, they were fighting these guys, right? The Celts. The Celts are very clan-oriented, very community-oriented, very heavy on family and family history and whatnot. So this is a picture of the priesthood at the time that ran the Celtic cultures. And we know them today as the Druids. Unfortunately, they get translated through their more medieval version of a Druid, which is like a shapeshifter and, mythical guy who's got a magic staff and whatnot. But the ancient Druids prior to the time of Christ couldn't be more different than that. They were very religious. They were very ritualistic. And in the middle here, I just have a list of some of the beliefs that these ancient Druids held and taught. You can see they're dressed in white, right? These are the depictions of what these ancient Druids might have looked like. From my perspective, they had a temple site. They absolutely practiced the law of Moses, the concept of atonement, and temple worship. It's all very straightforward. And we can talk, that's a whole nother topic we can talk about sometime.
I love that. Okay.
Yeah. So they talked heavily in their temples about a spiritual afterlife and the significance of what you do now and how that impacts later. They had the concept of the tree of life, 100%. They made covenants. They taught a godhead. Basically, they had the creator of the past, or the creator God, the spirit of the present, and the savior of the future.
Interesting. So like a Father, Son, almost Holy Ghost type of structure.
They had a Father, Son, Holy Ghost, yeah. And there's a lot of symbology they use with the oak tree and things that you start to think about, like, okay, they're talking tree of life, they're talking Holy of Holies. It's fascinating stuff.
And I see that it says AKA Isis. What does that mean?
So the name of the savior of the future was Isis.
Okay.
That was the god's name.
Fascinating.
Now, the Book of Mormon, us LDS and the Book of Mormon, we get all kinds of flack about you have the name of Jesus in the Old Testament. The Book of Mormon is Old Testament, the first half of it, right? Well, you have Nephi over here prophesying of Jesus by name. That's proof that it's false. The Old Testament never mentions Jesus by name, right? In fact, it's extremely vague on how it references the prophecies of the Messiah. We have like Isaiah, and that's it, right?
Right.
And so it's a strong critique of the Book of Mormon, but a lot of apocryphal texts, pseudepigraphal texts, including things like the Dead Sea Scrolls. You're going to see much stronger prophecies of the Messiah and uses of variations of his name more frequently.
Fascinating. Okay.
And the Druid had it too. Yeah, they had him by name. So just to back me up, so I don't have to go into, trying to prove what I'm saying. I just have some experts here quoting their studies of the ancient Druidic faith. Sir Norman Locke here, I confess I'm amazed at the similarities we have come across between the Judaic or the Hebrew patriarchal faith and the Druidic. We have Edward Davies. I must confess that I've not been the first in representing the Druidical as having had some connection with the patriarchal faith. He's talking about the Judaic or Hebrew patriarchal faith. W.M. Stukely, I plainly discern the religion professed by the ancient Britons was the simple patriarchal faith.
Wow. Okay. So they're definitely between the Druids and the Judaic faith or the patriarchal religion, lots of similarities. And they're saying, I can't deny that these things are similar.
That's right. Right down to what the archdruid would wear as his vestments before he would perform any kind of sacred ceremony. Right.
Wow.
Special vestments that he would wear, sash and all that. So we're gonna move through some timelines quite quick. So now we're jumping ahead to what we have here on the screen is the grandmother of Jesus, the mother of the Virgin Mary. Her name is Saint Anna. In Celtic tradition, contrary to what Roman Catholic tradition holds, the Celtic tradition holds that Anna was part of their royal family, the Gewissae, which means the family of the knowers or the wise ones, the ones who are by God to receive certain blessings or rule and govern, similar to like what you hear Israel bless his son Ephraim and Judah with, right?
Okay.
So they have this like Davidic lineage concept. Anyways, they describe her as a princess from a Celtic family in Britain. She was very wise, very graceful, and also a person of authority. She had sway. And the place she was from was Cornwall. And just a quick story before we get in here. This is going to talk about kind of the Virgin Mary's origin story a little bit. Saint Anna marries a Jew. His name's Joachim, and he is from Judea. And so early Roman Catholics were like, there's no way the Celtic tradition is true. She must have been from Nazareth because people didn't travel. That's why I want to point out those Phoenician ships. No, the Britons did travel, and they traveled frequently. In fact, it's Cornwall where the tin and lead mines were that Rome cared about so much, and the Phoenicians before them cared about so much, that were in trade all the way through the Mediterranean. And if you wanted to trade those materials outside of the Mediterranean, you would go to the connection to the Silk Road, which was Judea. This is why Rome loved holding and taking advantage of Jerusalem and Judea, because it was a gold mine for them. It was a trade hub. It was the trade hub of the world at the time. Them and Egypt.
Gotcha.
Because Egypt could cross you over to the Red Sea and get you over to India by ocean routes, which were way faster than land routes. So anyway, Saint Anna and her family own these trade operations that are training all the way as far as Jerusalem. So anyways, that's how she gets over there. In their old age, they were barren. They had no children. They prayed and told God, if you give us a child, we will dedicate her to you. And so all of a sudden, she conceives Mary, has a daughter, and at a young age, they take her back to Jerusalem. They hand her over to their relatives, Zachariah and Elizabeth. at the temple, and she's given to the matrons of the temple to serve in the temple her whole life. She was raised in the temple at Jerusalem.
Wow.
So then she comes of age while she's in the temple, and it comes time for her to marry. And there's some incredible stories of how Joseph the carpenter becomes that guy, the guy to marry the the daughter of the matrons of the temple, you could say. Very important person. The Sadducees, their hope was that they would be able to combine the right ingredients to produce the Savior. The Sadducees were wild. They were crazy. They thought it was like their mission to produce the Savior who would kick Rome out of their country, right, and be this great conqueror. And they at one point thought, Mary's going to be that child. And when Joseph the carpenter gets chosen, they kind of protest this. They're like, this is not the guy. Anyways, it does. And so Joseph the carpenter becomes the husband to Mary. And the shocking thing about him is he was old enough to have kids of his own. He was not a young guy like her. In fact, he was a widower. And so by the time he marries Mary, he has children of his own. And that's what's up here on the board. We've got 3 older brothers and 2 older sisters, at least, older siblings of Jesus. And at least 1 younger sibling whose name was Judas, that was a younger brother of his. And interestingly enough, Judas gets called the twin of Jesus in all the accounts we can see. I mean, it's one of the most prolific comparisons. He's by far the most talked about of all the other siblings because he looked like Jesus. And they're actually the only ones that share blood through their common mother, which is Mary.
Gotcha.
Okay. There in the New Testament, I talk about, that Jesus had siblings. There's no question. They talk about him here. They even give their names. Right. So yeah, and a lot of people assume that was children after Jesus, but the records that we have don't tell that story. So this family gets raised in Nazareth. And what's interesting about Nazareth is that it is a small town. It's out in the middle of nowhere. People are like, what good thing could come of Nazareth, right?
Would you say that Nazareth is like saying you're from Ogden?
You could say that.
Yeah. Or Brigham City or something like that.
I'd say it's more like Tooele or
okay,
Shane or something.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Shane, like way out there. And in the mountains a little bit. You can see it's kind of up on a hillside. If you look at the geography of Nazareth, it was actually set up by the Roman Empire. It was provisioned by Rome to be a residence for their employees working at the port of Caesarea. They're Jewish hired employees. So it was like an employment camp sponsored by the Roman Empire. And it has a straight shot down. You travel a couple weeks and you're at the port of Caesarea, which Rome was building to be like the next massive port. And you can go to the next slide, Andrea, to show what that port looked like. This is the port Romans were building at the time. And it was state of the art. They were using like self-drying concrete underwater and things like that to build this port. And it was going to be the new major trade hub. Again, Judea was the trade hub of the world. Rome held on to it for dear life because it made them so many connections and so much money. So they invested in this port. Joseph the carpenter was hired. In fact, the term carpenter in the New Testament, a better translation is actually architect.
Wow. Okay.
Over carpenter. And so he was hired to work on the port of Caesarea. And one day he comes home and he's sick. He's totally ill. As I described before, he's already older. He's got older kids. But he has younger kids also. And so in a book called The History of Joseph the Carpenter, it's an apocryphal work there, it describes his death. And he's terrified. He's afraid to leave this family, fatherless and without them. The word kind of comes to us through the Roman Catholic Church, but so it's a little wordy, but nevertheless, he passes away. And in Judaic custom, it was the responsibility of the next nearest adult male in the family to take over for a husband or a father who died, to finish raising the boys into men, get them to their mitzvah, get them to the age of adulthood and independence. And so the question is, who becomes that man for the Holy Family? It wasn't Joseph the carpenter's brothers. He was super old already. He actually didn't have any brothers, and his parents are gone. He has no uncles. He's super old. They're all dead already. You look at Mary's side of the family. She was an only child. She has no brothers. And so the only viable answer is Anna's family. Joachim has already passed. Anna actually had a younger brother who ran and operated the tin and lead mines there in Cornwall. Remember, they are the royal family. They are the owners, the what's the word I'm looking for? I'll just say owners of that operation on behalf of the Roman Empire. I'll talk about that in a little bit.
This is Jesus's rich uncle that I've heard about, Joseph of Arimathea.
Joseph of Arimathea. Now, they describe him as Joseph of Arimathea because that's the place in Judea where he had a residence. But a better description would have been Joseph of Cornwall or Joseph of Britain. So anyways, who Joseph is, actually, if you want to go back, Andrea, to that previous slide, this is important. How do we know that Joseph is this great uncle of Jesus? And how do we know that he takes over for the family? There's no record that says that definitively, although there's some that are pretty dang close. There's some apocryphal texts where you have the Apostle John describing Joseph as polyamphoros, which means guardian of the family. But in scriptures, we have these two examples here. We have Jesus teaching at the temple at age 12. And I would just ask the question, how is this possible? This just doesn't seem likely to me that a 12-year-old gets left in the big city of Jerusalem by himself. There's no adult with him. Who's giving him a place to stay? Where is he staying? Who's giving him food, shelter, right? I wouldn't leave my 12-year-old in New York for more than 3 minutes before I'm panicking where he might be. But his parents, Joseph and Mary, they seem, 3 days go past before they're worried about it. And then all of a sudden they're super worried about it, right? It's almost like there's a 3-day expectation of something to happen. Anyway, it makes a lot more sense if Joseph has a residence in Arimathea, which we believe he did, which is very close outside of Jerusalem and on the way home to Galilee, that Jesus probably stayed with him. They probably left him with him. No doubt Joseph of Arimathea had plenty of business to do in Jerusalem. Jesus hanging out with him. 3 days go by and they're like, hey, we should have rendezvoused at this point. And then they panic and go back. Makes way more sense to me. And then, sorry, Andrew, if you want to stay on that slide, the next
there. Okay.
is the real nail in the coffin, which is when Joseph of Arimathea approaches Pilate and asks for the body of Jesus and just gets it from this Roman leader. Just gets it. In Roman law, only the nearest of kin, only immediate family are allowed to request the body of the deceased. It would not have been possible otherwise. Also, the Sanhedrin had relegated Jesus to be buried in a common grave, just like in an unmarked grave in an empty field, the field of criminals. And so where are they running when Joseph asked for the body? Where are them running and saying, no way, you're not burying him in your, honored, nice family tomb. We have him sentenced to this field. The only explanation is that they couldn't stop him because he was within Roman law.
Gotcha.
So who is this guy, Joseph of Arimathea? At the time, he was probably one of the wealthiest and most connected people alive. And that's because tin and lead were the most important, most valuable components in the entire Roman Empire, most valuable materials in the Roman Empire. Tin was mixed with copper to make brass. Brass made weapons. Okay, their entire arms division and arms manufacturing depended on tin from Britain, which was one of the richest tin mines in the ancient world, quite possibly one of the only ones. Lead was used by Rome for all of their soldering projects. So all their aqueducts, their baths, all this stuff they prided themselves on, that they oriented their architecture around, required lead for soldering. That's how they made them waterproof and structurally strong. And so that's Joseph of Arimathea was providing these materials to the Roman Empire. Now, Arimathea is also a place known as Ramah. It's a pivotal trade region. And you can see the map there on the top right. It's north of Jerusalem and just east of the port of Jaffa, or Joppa, which was the Jews' major trade port. Okay, this is where the tribe of Dan operated their Danite vessels on behalf of King David and King Solomon to bring in resources for building the Temple of Solomon and all that kind of stuff. It's also a straight along the path going north up to Galilee, where Jesus was from. The word counselor is used to describe Joseph of Arimathea in the Gospels. Now, counselor, in Jerome's translation of the Bible, the word they used in Greek was actually senator, or one who is appointed to sit in council. So it got translated as a counselor, but the actual word used was senator, and the only senators around are Roman senators, right? And according to the Celtic sources that we have and early church fathers, as described by Archbishop Ravenous Maurus there, he was nobilis decurio in the Roman Senate. It's a title of a Roman senator. A decurio is someone in charge of procurement or in charge of a specific trade, a critical trade. Rome was all about their trade connections. And nobilis means you're like the chief of that trade. And usually a nobilis decurio was a senator, almost always, actually. You'd never find one that wasn't. And so what's Joseph's assigned trade on behalf of the Roman Empire? The one that he owned himself. So you have this guy who owns the most profitable mineral mines in the world and has a seat on the Roman Senate, who becomes Jesus's adopted father.
Wow. Fascinating. Makes it easy to become a rabbi at 30.
Yeah. And Rome had conquered the entire Phoenician Empire a few centuries prior to this. They had access to their entire fleet of seaworthy, open ocean-worthy trade ships. And no doubt Joseph of Arimathea had his own personal fleet or a few conducting these this metals trade on behalf of Rome, and for his homeland in Cornwall. And so it should be no surprise that we have now, at age 15, Joseph the carpenter dies. He gets adopted by Joseph of Arimathea. And Joseph of Arimathea is like, I got business. I got a family back in Cornwall. I got a whole operation I'm conducting, I'm responsible for. You guys are coming with me, right? So they head to Britain when Jesus was about 15, and there are an unbelievable amount of traditions of Jesus visiting as a young teenager in Britain. If you go to the Anglican Church or the Church of England or even the LDS congregations in Britain, they'll all tell you this. They'll all tell you, yeah, we have traditions. Jesus was over at this place. He was over here. He stayed over here. He would get water from this well over here. He would sleep over here at his grandmother's house. All this kind of thing. Here's where Joseph taught him how to extract tin from a wolfram and prepare it for shipment down to the coast, right? They have these legends that just litter the countryside over there in Britain. And so
what tribe do we think Joseph of Arimathea is from then?
Personally,
Levite?
Judah.
Okay.
Now,
so we think Mary would then be from Judah.
Yep.
They're linked, right? Okay.
So all the Bible scholars I know that look at the genealogy of Jesus given in the New Testament is given twice, and both times it's labeled as the genealogy of Joseph the carpenter, which is always funny because Joseph the carpenter didn't share blood with Jesus at all. But
right. It's his adopted dad, essentially.
Yeah, but they all agree that those are probably the genealogies of the Virgin Mary.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't think she got that from Britain. She got it or from Judea. It came through Britain. But there's a whole nother presentation there that we can talk about. But
Gotcha.
so Jesus is there at age 15. I believe the evidence shows that he came back again at age 20. And there's a large volume of evidence to support this one, much more than the visit at age 15. It's clear from multiple sources, early church fathers, records from the Roman Catholic Church, Celtic records from William the Conqueror, like 1,000 years later, are still supporting this, that Jesus went to Britain and built himself a booth of Succoth and dedicated to his mom at her birthplace. Now, in Jewish custom, according to the Mishnah, which is an ancient Jewish rabbinical handbook, I guess you could say, from like 200 AD, Jewish boys would perform as part of the Feast of Tabernacles. They would build a tabernacle themselves, or a booth of Succoth, patterned after the one Jacob built in the desert, where he set a stone as a pillar and saw the ladder with angels coming up and down. All this temple symbology, right? The Feast of Tabernacles is heavily symbolic of what we do in our temples. And part of what they would do is they do their mitzvah by building this booth of Succoth, which is like a little hut made of green branches that were flexible, kind of like what you would keep your animal in anyways. And they walk in and walk back out a man around the age 19, 20 back then. And in Britain, we have accounts that Jesus built a booth of Succoth in Glastonbury in Britain, a place called Glastonbury. And I have a bunch of sources there in the top right, but the most interesting one that I like is actually from a Roman Catholic, St. Augustine, who said that he discovered a church constructed by no human art, but divinely constructed for the salvation of his people. The Almighty has made it manifest by many miracles and mysterious visitations that he continues to watch over as sacred to himself and to Mary, the Mother of God. For over a millennia, this site was held in veneration as a site of the house of God. Okay, the house of God, built as a fulfillment of the Feast of Tabernacles, where Jesus built a hut and dedicated it to his mother. You dedicate to your parents, but he dedicated it specifically to his mother. So it was always held as the Church of Mary, or the Church of Jesus, or the Church of Mary dedicated to it was both. It ends up getting a huge abbey built on top of it, St. Mary's Abbey, in the medieval ages. Anyways, this brings Jesus back to Britain again. And he's not there to teach. He's not there to spread his gospel. He's 20 years old. He's there to learn, to study. All the evidence points that he was quiet. He studied there at Glastonbury from the Druidic records he had that were available. Now, William the Conqueror describes this site as the Domus Dei, or the house of God. He conquers this land. He starts divvying out the real estate, and he's going through the records, and he finds this place where there's 12 hides of land that have never paid tax ever. That's called the house of God. And what the site originally looked like, or what they suspect it originally looked like when it was first settled, is something like this, where you have 12 huts surrounded by a hut in the middle that was supposedly built over the top of Jesus's booth of Succoth. In Britain, they call it Jesus's wattle church. Wattle meaning flexible branches.
Interesting.
Now the question becomes, well, who built that second church, right? That's on there that they have all these traditions and records of. Who on earth constructs that? And that's where we get into an event known as the Exodus of the Faithful. And we were talking earlier, I was like, oh, this sounds really similar to an event known in history. So you can change the slides here, Andrea. Exodus of the Faithful is an event is captured in Acts briefly. There's a rendezvous. I think it's like Acts chapter 2 or something. I forget the exact chapter. But the Apostle Peter is organizing a meeting with a lot of the apostles and prominent associates to Jesus, like Lazarus and Maximum and his mother, Virgin Mary, and everything. And Joseph of Arimathea is there as well. And it's in Caesarea, and sources there in the bottom left. where they're gathering, and the Sadducees catch wind that this Christian gathering is happening. And this is right after the crucifixion. I mean, this is within a couple years of Jesus being crucified. And the Pharisees and Sadducees are on a mission to just exterminate all life of this, following this uprising they considered of Christianity. They thought killing Jesus was just going to silence everything, right? They'd be done with it. And they were terribly wrong. So they thought, we just got to keep eliminating these people. And Jesus's family was the first one in their sights. So they catch wind of this happening. And we've got Joseph of Arimathea showing up. We got Josephus, which is one of the older brothers of Jesus. We have some family of Joseph of Arimathea. His daughter Anna showing up here. And so they send a group to go capture as many of these people as they can. So they show up at this place in Caesarea, and the Christians flee at their arrival. And they're able to catch and round up as many of them as they can. And this list right here is everyone that they're able to capture. So they've captured Joseph, they've captured Mary Magdalene, Josephus, Mary and Martha, Lazarus, Maximin, Anna, Cassius. In fact, one record says they caught 12. Another record says they caught up to 70. I don't know which one. They catch a lot of these Christians. And the records we have, sorry, stay on that slide, Andrea, is that the Sadducees got away with killing Jesus by using Pilate. But they can't just kill. They still are beholden to the law of Moses. They have people watching them. They can't just execute somebody without just cause to actually execute them. And so they come up with this plan that they are going to send them adrift on a boat with no oars, no sails, push them out into the Mediterranean Ocean, and just cross their fingers that, nature is going to arrange the outcome we want here. And we can go back to our homes clean of their blood because we didn't actually kill them, at least not directly. Okay, so that's their genius plan.
Wow.
So they push these guys out. And of course, Joseph of Arimathea is probably one of the greatest shipwrights of his time. He's able to potentially rig a sail up of, whatever they have on their backs. And by no doubt prayer and the grace and help of God, they make it to Egypt. Follow the currents, then make it down to Egypt. Now, knowing who Joseph of Arimathea is, he's got connections. Egypt is one of the next biggest trade ports in the world. He's got people there he can work with. He can accrue better resources, a properly outfitted ship, and they can get, hightail and get out of there. They've got the Pharisees and Sadducees hot on their tail. They've got the Roman Empire ticked off. Rome is starting to hunt these Christians down. They've got to figure out, how do we get out of this place and get these people, the closest family members of Jesus, to safety. So that becomes their mission, right? And according to some of the sources we have, including some of the early church fathers, you can go to the next slide, Andrea. This is the path they take to get out of there. And again, each stop, no doubt, they're finding some connection of Joseph of Arimathea to hide them, to secrete them. They're trying to inconspicuously, regather, restock, get resources. And the goal is to make it to number 7. Number 7 is Marseille. Number 7 is a safe point. It was an early Christian outpost thanks to the Apostle Philip. A lot of people don't know the Apostle Philip was given the assignment to preach the gospel in Gaul, or in other words, in France. The apostles they divided up the entire known world and had a specific apostle assigned to each region, just like the brethren do today, right? So after a while, they're able to make it safely to Marseille, where they met. They're met by a group of friendlies, and you can change the slide there, Andrea. A group of friendlies there that include the Apostle Philip and a Druidic delegation that's assigned to take them safely across Gaul and into Britain. Now, ultimately, Britain is the safest place away from not just the Jews, but the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is in constant battle with Gaul. Gaul is not a safe place, but Britain is.
Okay.
It's one of the only safest. It's probably the safest place in the entire world at the time. It also happens to be where Joseph of Arimathea is from, and he has all the resources needed to get them there. So they have this rendezvous here, and of course the Druids are already catching wind of the crucifixion of Jesus. They have connections here. I can talk about the Apostle Paul for a while. His family has not only connections to Rome, being a Roman citizen, but he has connections to some Celtic Brits also. So they're able to get across Gaul, escape the Roman Empire, and cross the Channel and arrive on the shores of Britain. Then this is around 35, 36 AD. So we're just a few years after the crucifixion that they're landing in Britain. And the guy they meet on the next slide, Andrea, is a guy named Bron, who it was fun studying this because I was, that's where my name comes from. They meet this guy, Bron. He's known in history as Bron the Blessed, or in Celtic mythology, he's almost treated like a godlike almost in their mythology. But in the histories, a little more grounded, he's the archdruid. He's the spiritual leader of the Celts in Britain. And one of the kings of one of their clans, Britain at the time was divided into over 20 different small kingdoms, each its own clan of Celts. And he was one of the kings, but he was recognized as the archdruid as far as the religion, this patriarchal religion that they had at the time. So he would be the officiator at the temple, for example. And his kingdom was west in Wales, near where Glastonbury was. Next slide, Andrea. Thank you. And so here's just a brief connection of how these people relate. You have Joseph of Arimathea. He brings his daughter Anna. Anna ends up marrying Bron the Blessed. And Bron the Blessed has a son named Caractacus, who's going to become important here in just a minute. And Bron the Blessed's brother, Hermes, has a son, Arviragus. Now, I don't know if you can see in this slide, but there's references there to Romans, like 1614 under Hermes. And a lot of these people have references to New Testament scriptures. Every single one of those references is a mention by Paul, the apostle, who knows all these guys. He's familiar with all of these guys. And it's primarily through this lady on the middle left here, Claudia, who Paul's brother marries Claudia. Paul's brother, Rufus Pudens. But yeah, all these guys, I mean, these aren't hidden. These aren't names that I made up. They're all in the New Testament.
Wow. Yeah, I've seen these names. I've seen Linus. I've seen some of these names in there for sure.
Yeah, so a lot of historians tried to this must be this Roman and this Roman. But actually, Claudia ends up living in Rome, marries a Roman, Rufus Pudens, Paul's brother, becomes known as Gladys in a lot of the Roman Christian history. She was a very famous Christian. She was Tiberius's adopted, Tiberius loved her so much, he adopted her as his own daughter. Anyways, I wanted to point out Caractacus and Arviragus because they're going to play a critical role here as we're going to start getting into some of this Book of Mormon type stuff here in the British Isles. At least parallels to the Book of Mormon. Go ahead, Andrea. So Joseph and his company are given 12 hides of land in Glastonbury. And these 12 hides of land just so happen to include the original ancient Druidic temple site. And that temple site is known as Mount Tor. It's an unbelievable site. It's worth going and checking out. They had the Mother Earth symbol there, or the labyrinth, which was a unique track. It's not a maze where there's fake paths and dead ends and stuff. It's just a path you walk in a circle. And the whole point of it was to reflect on your role in God's plan for you and how your relationship with him is developing, and to disconnect from the world until you got to the top, and then you could participate in the temple ceremonies at the top. And they had a grove of trees up there. They had a special tree in the middle, and they would teach about the creation of the earth, the creation of man, God's plan for man, their role in the cosmos and the afterlife, was all taught up there. They even have the role of the serpent or the dragon who would guard the tree of knowledge. It's all there.
Wow, that's cool.
Instead of a serpent, they call him a dragon, interestingly enough. So that site, sorry, we'll stay on that side for just a minute longer. That site is where they're gifted lands, and right there you have, just like within a block of each other, the site where Jesus built his house and dedicated it to his mother. And so they settle that area and build their temple site just a block away. So you've got 2 temple sites in the same plot of land there in Glastonbury in Britain. And these become their sacred lands, the epicenter of Christianity. And Christianity burns like wildfire in this area. You have Bron the Blessed being baptized by Joseph of Arimathea within a short amount of time. His entire clan is joining the church. It's just like Ammon, right? You convert the king, you're going to get the rest of the people following. And people just start flocking to this area. Celtic peoples from all tribes all around come see what's going on. These guys are saying it's fulfillment of the prophecy of the Messiah, right? And they're converting in droves.
Bron, do we have any idea of are these people that are living there, are they from one of the 12 tribes? Do we have any guesses as to who Bron the Blessed was he from any one of the 12 tribes, or was he considered a Gentile, or do we know any of that?
Yeah, we know a lot of that. And it would take a long time to talk through. But for the most part, these Celtic peoples, they're all House of Ephraim.
Gotcha. That's what I've heard. I just wanted to, I assume this is Ephraim that we're talking about here. And that makes sense that when they hear about the Messiah, just like Ephraim today, it kind of burns in their blood. They just kind of know it.
Yep. These people are all House of Ephraim. And there's several ways in which that is the case, not just one or two.
Gotcha.
Now that might conflict a little bit about what I said earlier about Saint Anna and Joseph probably being of the house of Judah, and they were that specific family line, and that's another story that gets into the prophet Jeremiah and some really cool, actually Masonic texts the Freemasons had and the Knights Templar had some of these records.
Okay. Next slide.
Yeah. So a couple decades go back. Tiberius passes away, the next emperor takes on, and the next Roman Empire is a complete brutal dictator and absolutely despises the Christian church because Christianity is starting to rival Roman mythology as an influencer in the world. In fact, Christian culture is starting to rival Roman culture as one of the great influencers in the world. And the epicenter of that, according to the Romans, was not Judea, although Judea was also happening. They were getting it from both sides. But the real cause, according to what the Romans saw at least, was Britain's influence over the world, rivaling their own, specifically British Christianity. And so they launched an all-out assault on Rome. They started recruiting all their best generals from the Gallic Wars, from the Parthian Wars. They're bringing in their best guys. They decide we're going to take out Britain in one fell swoop. We're just going to take it clean as quickly as possible. And Emperor Nero actually is the one who ends up finishing out this war. I don't know if you know much about Emperor Nero, but he was the guy who soaked the Colosseums in the blood of the martyrs of the Christians, right? I mean, he ends up killing Claudia and Rufus, who are prominent Romans in the Colosseum. So he takes over this battle, and it's an all-out assault. And you have these stories of these Celts buried, of course, in history because Rome claimed victory in this battle. But they are rallying around Wales and the West to try to hold the line. You can see the line there. These are from the history books of how far Rome really got in its conquest. And there in the red circle is where the temple site was, the Holy Lands. That's where Glastonbury is. And you have these clans just thronging to this site to protect it. It was their sacred sites. It meant their God, it meant their religion, it meant their family, their country. And according to their records, it was everything to preserve their liberty to worship as they wanted.
Wow. Okay.
Now, the king of this area, it's operated by the clan known as the Sillers, and the king was Caractacus in the north, and in the southern area was King Arviragus. And these guys are the cousins I was pointing out earlier. And they flock to protect this site. Next slide. So here we have Caractacus and Arviragus, Pendragon of Britain. So Pendragon is an important statement. Caractacus becomes at this time the Pendragon of the British Isles. Pendragon is, of all the chiefs, of all the kings of the clans, they would meet together and appoint one to be general of their combined army. Whenever there was a threat great enough, the clans would get together and appoint one Pendragon. And so appointed as Pendragon was Caractacus. And it becomes his job to win the war, essentially. But then they appoint Arviragus to protect the sacred sites, the Holy Lands. So they developed this two-pronged war, and it's very similar to me in the war chapters in Alma of Captain Moroni and Helaman.
Gotcha.
The physical battle and the spiritual battle over here. And so Caractacus, trying to protect Wales in the north, ends up just back and forth battles. Just he wins, Rome wins. He wins, Rome wins. But slowly the Romans are pushing them back. And he ends up having to flee to northern Wales to a clan known as the Brigantes, the queen of which ends up betraying him over to the Rome as a prisoner. And they lose Caractacus. They lose their Pendragon. And there's in fact, they study the speech given by Caractacus on the Roman Senate floor in schools in Britain. It's a fantastic speech. But the most important part is Tacitus in his histories records that speech and then says, nevertheless, the Britons, without their leader, were able to repeatedly put to rout the Roman armies by the army of Arviragus alone. So Arviragus, hanging back, takes his mission to heart and says, you know what, it doesn't matter. We're not losing these sites so long as we hold true to our God. And Arviragus ends up painting a cross on his shield. It says he puts on the garment, the white garment of his father, Bron the Blessed. Most people have no idea what that means, just kind of skip over that. But he wears the white garment as a protection, saying, by the name of Jesus, we are going to win this battle. Right? And he rallies all his soldiers. They all paint crosses on their shields. They go to fight the Romans, and they're able to hold this site through the entirety of the battle.
Wow, that's cool.
Really fantastic story, worth checking out. So this is just what that picture, that battle might have looked like as Rome attempts to take Cadbury. Again, Cadbury being the hill fort placed in front of the sacred lands. Now, it's interesting. We're going to get, I do want to talk a little bit about Arthurian legend here, because how do you talk about ancient Britain and not talk about King Arthur? King Arthur talks about an island that was sacred and holy. It's almost like magical in the mythos. And in front of it is a castle called Camelot. Now, back in Jesus's time, sea levels were 1 meter or 2 higher, roughly. And today, Mount Tour is a mountain above what's basically marshland, but in Jesus's time would have been a lake. It would have been surrounded by water. It's exactly how the Arthurian legends describe the island of Avalon. Okay, and it's the place where Arthur discovers the Holy Grail and all this other stuff. The Grail, probably a symbol of birthright or knowledge of Jesus of some type. And in front of it, you have this castle, Cadbury Hill Fort, which I believe was probably the site of Camelot. It was as important a strategic castle and as advanced of a castle as they had back in those times. And it comes into Arthurian legend about 450, 500 years later when you have the Saxons now invading instead of Rome. They end up settling a peace treaty with Rome and building up what's essentially a partnership with the Roman Empire. You fast forward 450 years, and the church is starting to decay. It's the pride cycle to a T. They're so productive, they're so wealthy, they're so industrious, right? They've built up such a prosperous place that actually Rome doesn't even see the need to conquer them. They have such a great trade deals hooked up with Rome. It's no big deal. They're partners. But they start to lose grasp on their faith, and they start to worry more about their riches, their wealth, their status. There's a famous historian at the time, alive during this time. His name was Gildas. I'll talk about him in a minute. But he wrote several records documenting this time period, and only one of which has survived. They're almost all destroyed. But the one that did survive basically details the collapse of the church, the collapse of the faithfulness, the righteousness of the church and its members at this time. So the Celtic Britons are being invaded by the Vikings, by the Picts in the north, and by basically Frankish groups from the south. They ask Rome for help, and Rome responds saying, "There's no way we can help you. We are crumbling." Roman Empire at the time was totally crumbling. Like, we can't do anything. You're on your own. So in their desperation, they reach out to the Germanic Saxon group and say, "Hey, can you guys come? We'll hire you as mercenaries. Come save us. We're slowly dying over here." So the Saxons come over. They make quick work of the Vikings, kick those guys out. They make quick work of the Picts, kick those guys out. And these guys are battle hardened. These Saxons, they're battle hardened, strong group. And they look around and they see this prosperous Britons, all their industry and their profitable trade networks. They see a lush, fertile land, and they decided, we're going to take this. These guys are easy. We might as well we're just going to take these guys out. And so they do. They start a whole new war. And this is, again, the site to protect becomes this sacred land. It becomes the, I guess you could say almost like the Battle of the Bulge, but probably not a great comparison. But yeah, almost like where they hold off these Saxon armies so long as they are righteous. And according to Gildas, as long as they're righteous, they're winning. And as long as they lose sight of that and start to boast in themselves, they start to lose. So Andrea, next slide there. So this is Gildas. This is the one record we have that survives of him. And he reminds me a lot of the prophet Ether. Very similar style. Okay, he's writing about the bishops. They're ordained to priesthood leadership, but all they care is filthy lucre, right? All they care is how much they're getting paid. Gildas laments the wickedness of Britain's kings and Britain's royalty and Britain's generals and their armies, and how if they don't get their act together and set aside their pride, the Saxons are just going to wipe them out. And it turns out that that's exactly what happens. The Saxons come in, eventually their wickedness prevails, and they're totally just wiped out. Next slide, Andrea. We'll keep moving. So we have this last guy, Saint Brendan. Saint Brendan was from Ireland, but as a missionary during this time, he was traveling all over the islands, including even northern Gaul, preaching the gospel and reestablishing the church. It was his whole mission, and he was, every time he'd go and set up a church and restore a congregation to the faith and appoint a bishop, after he would leave, that organization would crumble and fall apart. He lamented that he couldn't get the gospel to stick. And so he starts talking to his closest followers that, the Spirit of the Lord is drawing you west. The Spirit of the Lord tells me that Hy Brasil is what he would call. Hy Brasil is west. The translation of Brazil is paradise, not a country. It means paradise. But what actually he called it most often was the land of the promise of the saints.
Wow.
Or the promised land. Sometimes it
sounds familiar.
So he was telling his closest followers, the ones that were still righteous and faithful to him and what he was teaching, that God is pulling us west, and we need to build a raft to get us west. Somewhere over the horizon lies a land of the promise of the saints, and we need to get there.
Wow.
So he does a few small journeys and makes it to Iceland and stuff and back that are documented. And then he says it's time, and he gathers up what records he can and what relics he can. He builds a giant, what's called a coracle. It's a type of ship. It's insulated with animal skins and like fats and oils. And he takes off, and he's gone for 7 years. He disappears. 7 years he's gone, and he comes back to the British Isles and says, I found it, the land of promise. It's out there. And just doesn't say anything else about it. Doesn't tell his family, doesn't tell anybody. He's just quiet. He's just like, I found it. I have nothing more to say. And his family's like wondering, like, what happened? Like, tell us what, and he wouldn't tell anybody. Until the year, so he takes off in 570 AD, and towards the end of 577, after he's come back for a few months, he gathers his family together and he tells them what happened. And the original count of what happened is gone. We don't have it anymore. But we do have a romanticized version written by the French a few centuries later. It's all that remains of what he said. Well, the theory is that he made it, from what he describes, that he made it to the eastern coast of the U.S. And you can change the slide here, Andrea. He makes it to the Promised Land. Now, the Vikings were inspired by his journeys and actually would follow his path. The reason the Vikings were traveling this route, this northern Atlantic route, is because of the inspiration of St. Brendan. The Vikings called Nova Scotia their Vinland, and they called the entire northeastern United States there, Maine, New York, New Hampshire, they called all that Greater Ireland as the name of the place where St. Brendan and his followers settled. So according to the Vikings, they make it, right? This guy, Tim Severin, back in the 90s, built a coracle exactly like St. Brendan's and recreated this journey exactly with a ship using only materials available. And this is the route that it took him. What I've drawn on the red here. And you'll find that route takes you extremely close to the Hill Cumorah. In fact, if you take the northern route towards the Great Lakes, you basically land on top of the Hill Cumorah there. And this is the same path where you have the Native Americans who talk about the turtle ships that came across the sea, and our ancestors came and the turtle ships were flipped upside down, and because we built them such a way, they're safe. That's a Native American legend from just north of the Great Lakes there. But St. Brendan's journey happens in 570 AD, and I think he probably made it this far. Do I know that he made it this far? No, I don't know that he made it this far. That's just what little evidence we have suggests. There is a Celtic ruin site known as American Stonehenge there in New Hampshire, where the end of that red line is, which is a just interesting point to plot there. But what really stands out is this. D&C 86.3 is a prophecy of the restoration. It said, Satan saith to rain, behold, he soweth the tares, wherefore the tares choke the wheat and drive the church into the wilderness. Okay, the wheat and the tares. This is an analogy Jesus taught about the great apostasy, right? Then we have Revelations 12:6. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she, and the woman is a representative of the church. According to LDS and Christian scholars, they all agree on this. Where she hath the place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. And everyone I've talked to understands that scholars I've talked to, that days actually means years in this setting. And if you do the math there, 570 from when St. Brendan leaves Ireland, 1,260 years, you get 1830.
Wow, that's cool.
Whether that means something, I don't know, but that's how the math adds up. Dean
Cool.
33 verse 5. Again, and very verily I say unto you that this church have I established and called forth out of the wilderness. This is the prophecy received by Joseph Smith talking about the restoration. Right, so you have the church that gets choked out and has to flee into the wilderness 1260 years before it's brought back and restored out of the wilderness. So is it possible that St. Brendan was the longest outpost of the primitive church prior to the Great Apostasy? Maybe. Anyways, that's what I have today of the connection to the Book of Mormon from this ancient Celtic church.
That was way cool. There's so many of these stories that I knew Joseph of Arimathea played a role, but to what role? And now I've learned more, and I knew he was wealthy, and now I understand why he was wealthy. So lots of cool things that you bring up here. I love that you're bringing in apocryphal writings, because we just don't have that much information if we're just going to rely on the four Gospels or even the New Testament for that matter. I mean, we just don't have that much information, and we're only covering 3 years of a guy's life that was here for 33 years. So I appreciate you filling in the gaps. Really cool. And it makes sense that Britain's playing a role in all of this, and Ephraim's playing a role in all of this, and they're kind of woven together. Drea, do you have any questions for Bron?
No, I don't. This was great. There's so many exciting points in there that I was just like, I don't know, just smiling and excited about. So that was super cool to learn. Thank you for sharing it.
What you're saying is now, Shane, made me think of one more thing. Heber C. Kimball, of course, served a very famous mission to Northern Wales area. And he was baptizing like crazy. They talk about hundreds of converts up in his first mission there. Anyways, on his way out, after about 9 months serving in north of Wales, he realizes his mission's come to an end. He wants to circle back to all these villages that he's been to and towns and just say goodbye on his way out. And so he's visiting these towns, and the people are coming out and they're just crying. They're so happy to see him, but also so sad that he has to go. He says he's got people standing at their doorstep as he's walking out of town, to see him off. And he passes through this one village where he just is overcome by the Spirit as he's walking out of this town. So the Spirit came down, pressed upon him that the ground he was standing on was holy ground. And he took off his hat and blessed, just said a prayer, a blessing on that area. He returns back to the States and meets up with Joseph Smith, the prophet, and relates this experience to Joseph Smith. Says, hey, I had this experience leaving this place. And Joseph Smith responded with, that's because where you was indeed sacred ground, and ancient prophets there have walked and taught those people and have blessed the site, and you were a fulfillment of their blessing. Now, I have no idea what ancient prophets means, right? What ancient prophets he was talking about. But maybe today there's some idea of who they could have been, right?
Wow. Yeah. Well, they certainly knew something, that's for sure. Bron, thank you so much for coming on. Always nice to have a Kimball on the pod. Lots of rich pioneer heritage running through you with Heber C. Kimball. He was one of the originals, no question. So thank you for coming on. I'm excited to have you back on. I have some other questions that relates to some of the other topics that we discussed. We talked about the Colburn Bible before in our pre-show, and I want to bring Bron back on to talk about the Colburn Bible. I've read the Colburn Bible, and I say the Colburn's like the Book of Mormon for the people over in the European area, that Britain area. So hopefully we'll have another episode where we will dive into that. So Bron, thank you so much for coming on. Hey, if you haven't signed up to come with us to Mexico, now's the time to do it. Listen, November 11th through the 18th or 19th. And it's going to be amazing. We're going to go see Nephi's temple. We're going to go see the Waters of Mormon. Click in the description, sign up, come with us, come join us. It's going to be like 30 or 40 people coming along on the trip. So make sure you sign up. Prices right now are really good pricing, where we're talking a couple $1,000s for an all expense paid, 7-8 day trip. So make sure you register, sign up now, because the pricing will be going up to around $3,500. So you want to get in now. But anyways, Bron, thank you so much for joining us. Drea, thank you for being on here. For myself, I'm Shane Baldwin. For Drea the Bomb and Bron Kimball, we'll see you guys all next time.